O nosso próximo assunto, tornando a economia verde, a importância de padrões de certificação inovadores e da boa qualidade no aprimoramento da transição. Está a cargo de Jinke van Dam. Ela é uma especialista sênior com mais de 15 anos de experiência internacional, prática e teórica em cadeias de valor sustentáveis e uso da terra para a produção de biomassa, combustíveis, energia, materiais, alimentos e rações. De 2007 a 2008, Jinke trabalhou como secretária interina da RT9 e concluiu seu doutorado sobre a sustentabilidade nas cadeias de bioenergia. O resultado está nos detalhes.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. 7 years ago I was indeed co-organizing the General Assembly in Buenos Aires, and now I'm standing here as a presenter, and I'm quite impressed what changed so far. So thank you for this opportunity. I will give my presentation about dynamics of certification in a green economy, and my presentation will be based on various projects that I did in the last years, and they are meant to show examples and to present some lessons learned, and hopefully also to provide some ideas. So what we are talking about when we are talking about the green economy, it is basically an economy that drives to better sustainability practices that reduces impacts over time. And high quality standards as RTRS can play a role here. They can make a change, and it's important that I say high quality because I think that is key, because a green economy requires the full scope of sustainability. It's about environment, it's about social issues, and it's also about economic impacts. But it's also about participatory approaches and about stakeholder consultation. So how can RTRS do so, and what are the current dynamics in the world? So what are current dynamics? We see that there is a growing production of soy, so that actually stresses the increased importance to drive best practices in soy production. We also see that it works in an international context with changing trade flows. China is gaining importance. We just heard yesterday that China received the first certificate, but we know that policies are different there than, for example, in Brazil or in Europe. We also see an increased trend of more domestic use of soy production. So we see increased competition between countries with different requirements also on sustainability, and no international level playing field there. So let me zoom in a little bit on one specific example on the biofuels market in Europe, just to give an example how these dynamics looked like in the last years. There in Europe, certification is used as means to prove compliance with the Renewable Energy Directive in Europe. European legislation for biofuels is not comprehensive in its scope of sustainability. This means, for example, that socio-economic requirements are not included. There has been a strong increase in certification standards to be used for biofuels. Some are solely developed to prove legal compliance, and this has resulted into an increased competition between certification standards with different levels of quality. And some of them, as ISCC, started to widen their scope to other end-use markets, as the food or fuel sectors. So here are two graphs. I will not explain them in detail. These are figures until 2013. The situation may have changed now because of stronger domestic use of soy in Brazil and the impact of the anti-dumping tariffs in Argentina, which reduced the export of biofuels to Europe. But the example is representative for how policies can drive increase in certification, which is a good thing. But also the competition between certification systems. When we look at the graphs below, this is a graph presented from a colleague of mine, which shows the strong increase of certification systems in Latin America, and especially the increase of ISCC and TBS-VS in comparison with RTRS, and this has happened in a very short time frame. So market demand has been driven to meet legal compliance there. So competition in itself between certification systems is good, but I think it is very important that there is a certain policy framework to steer this competition, and also that the transparency on this competition is clear. And when you look at specifically to the biofuels market, we see that cross-compliance is possible, and this hampers the transparency. I have presented a kind of example below. There you see that in the end market, you may, to give an example, end up with an ISCC certificate, but as ISCC for biofuels recognizes also other certification systems, we actually do not know if at the producer side, for example, RTRS is used, ISCC is used, or 2BS-VS is used. So how can you put yourself in the market as a standard if this is not shown actually at the consumer side? So what do we see at this moment? We see that laws and regulation are not comprehensive on sustainability at this moment, or are even absent. There is there is not a full scope international playing field in the market, and it will not be there, at least not on the short to mid-term. So a single driver to meet legal compliance as under the EU RED to use certification does actually not result into innovation and best practices. In contrary, it results into demand-driven competition between standards where legal compliance and cost are dominating. Still, producers have the option to choose, although they are also tightened by competition on the supply chain. So how can high quality standards drive change towards the green economy while facing these obstacles in current dynamics? So when going back to the ambition to make a change towards the green economy, we see some bottlenecks. There is a competition between standards and lack of level playing field on the demand and supply chain. There is the issue of financing, of costs and benefits, and there is a tendency to choose for the low-hanging fruit. And clearly this situation does not contribute to make a change towards more sustainable practices. So what could be done? And I will give you some ideas and lessons learned from some projects that I did in the last years. So first of all, I think it is key to understand and be transparent on what is behind the standards. I did some studies on this the last years, and this is one that looked specifically on assurance, so the guarantee to what is been done on paper is also practiced in the field. And there you see, this is specifically done for certification systems for biofuels, that there is a difference in strictness and quality of control between systems. There is a difference between RTRS, ISCC and 2BS-VS. And then what can you think then? You can think about, for example, requirements for group auditing. You can think about verification procedures, but also, for example, about requirements for stakeholder consultation. More studies on this have been done. The one above is a study from WWF that looked, for example, on standard development, and they marked the good, average and low performing standards in colors. And there you actually see the same results, that RTRS is performing good, and the system, for example, ST2BSVS performs remarkably in lower quality. The table below has also been presented by Helene yesterday, and this study also showed the same results. The table below is actually a compilation of requirements that have been looked at in this study, and then you can think, for example, about what have been compared, for example, stakeholder participation, group auditing, but also things like, is information publicly available? How are standards developed at all? Is that transparent? How are auditing procedures? So these studies are quite comprehensive, but all lead actually to the same kind of conclusions, that there is a difference between standards, and that they are different in the coverage, in their assurance requirements, and how criteria are verified. So what is needed? I think it is important that there is transparency on what certificates are standing for, also to incentivize the market, and that there is transparency on the quality of certification standards, that consumers and the markets in the broadest sense know what they are standing for and what the differences are. So we also see that laws and policies and regulations, especially for biofuels, will not be comprehensive in sustainability requirements, at least not in the short term. This does not mean that government and the market should not work together. In contrary, I think that they should have a strong link, and certification should not be isolated. I come back to that later, but they should not be the single driver for certification. Commitment from the market should therefore not only be demand and compliance driven, it should be really a choice to choose for a comprehensive standard that enables learning and change in the market. So then, looking at the issue of financing and cost, I think this is a topic that is quite debated. Financing is key, also to make additional requirements on the high quality certification standards and to make them economically viable, and to meet compliance costs and to create an incentives, and benefits have to outweigh the costs. I think we all agree upon that. So last year I did a project to explore which financing mechanisms are actually available to overcome additional costs to biodiversity conservation under a high quality standard as the RTRS. And we looked at mechanisms available and which conditions there are to apply them. The report is available. I'm quite sure you cannot read that, that on the table. But you can see that there are different mechanisms. There are payment for environmental services mechanisms, for example, on water, on biodiversity, on carbon. But there are also, for example, possibilities to look at regional funding, to look at tax mechanisms. I can send you the report if you're interested. So one important conclusion, I will go back shortly, of this report was that we made a differentiation between the short-term and long-term, and look whether these mechanisms could be applied in a sector alone or required cooperation with other sectors or with the government. And an important conclusion was that for most financing mechanisms and for the financing mechanisms that have more impact, that there is a need to move to a cross-sectoral approach, that there is a need to work together with government organizations. This just from a financing perspective. So this study looks at basically a short-term to middle-term approach. On the short term, it is essential to facilitate practical implementation of the standard, to clear up requirements of the standard and link to existing legislation, while creating financial incentives in the sector itself. But on the long term, to create more financial impact, it is important to look at cross-sectoral approaches, to work, for example, together with the forestry sector, with the livestock sector, but also with governments, with regions, and to establish at the same time minimal compliance standards. In this way, the financing impact is most effective, while at the same time linking to financing institutions by creating, for example, links with credit loans. On the other hand, we have the benefits. What are the economic benefits? And this is not only about economic benefits, but also for doing better businesses. Another study I did for evaluation of biomass projects actually learned that certification is useful to get financing from banks. That if you prove that you're sustainable, that you have an advantage of creating investments, that stakeholder consultation and participatory approaches do have a positive impact to get your project working well in a region, and that structuring your data and following certification requirements contributes to day-to-day business. It creates a better efficiency. But we need to have impacts and results on this to prove this. So final part is, at this moment there is a tendency for most certification systems to link out to those producers who have least difficulties to get certified. But we see that some groups are lagging behind, for example stakeholders, small producers, but also to get the better practices just at those places where it is needed, actually the more risky areas. So what is needed to do so? Then next to financial support, you will actually need to look a bit more at the learning and capacity building to get those producers and get those areas certified as well. And as we consider it certification as such, one can consider it more as a learning tool, as a tool to drive better practices and innovation. So in a project with Aid Environment, I looked at some models and tools that could be used in certification systems to allow for more learning and impact. And I presented some examples here. I also saw some interesting examples yesterday. You could think, for example, as stepwise compliant approaches. FSC is now doing as such that they allow producers in a 5-year time frame to get to reach full compliance of the standards. You could think of collaboration with, for example, extension programs in the countries, reward the best performance, but also data sharing. And I think, for example, the Observatorio de Soja is great there, that you see what is happening on a regional scale, and why not linking that up to what is being done by RTRS certified producers and share the best practices among the region. So to get to my conclusion, I wanted to present some ideas from projects I did in the past years on how a system as RTRS could contribute to the green economy in this complicated world and market. I think that RTRS really has a key role to play and front-running role to play together with its members to show that innovation and better practices are needed to make the transition to the green economy, and they are also worthwhile. And this way it can also possibly position itself in the market as a catalyst of change. So this was my presentation. Thank you for your attention.